"Mister, take my brother with you. He's hungry," said the 5-year-old boy to the millionaire. Richard Howard Thompson never imagined his life would change completely on a Tuesday morning in the parking lot of a shopping mall in Phoenix. The buy. 52-year-old businessman had just left a frustrating meeting with investors when two small barefoot figures approached his black Lexus. "Mister, take my brother with you. He's hungry," said the 5-year-old boy, holding the hand of an even smaller child. Richard stopped abruptly, his hand already on the car door handle. The boy who had spoken wore a faded striped t-shirt and patched-up blue shorts. His tiny feet were dirty from walking on the hot pavement. His little brother, who looked no older than 3, was shirtless, wearing only light shorts that had once been white. "What did you say, kid?" Richard asked, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "You have a nice car. You must have..." "Food at home," the boy explained with devastating simplicity. "My brother hasn't eaten since yesterday." The businessman looked around, searching for adults responsible for the children. The parking lot was full of cars, but empty of people at that early hour. Only a few mall employees hurried by in the distance. "Where are your parents?" Richard asked, crouching down to their level. "Mum went to work. She said she'd be back at night," answered the older boy, who would later introduce himself as Ethan. "But she said that yesterday too." The younger one, whom Richard would learn was named Michael, just watched with big, curious eyes. His ribs were visible under his sun-tanned skin. Richard felt something stir in his chest, a sensation he had spent years trying to avoid. 25 years of building a business empire had taught him emotional distance, to think of business. First, people second. But those two small faces completely disarmed him. "Where do you live?" he asked, still crouched. "Over there." Ethan pointed to a housing complex across the busy avenue. "Building 2, apartment 17. But there's no food there." Richard stood up, looking in the direction he'd pointed. The buildings were old, with peeling paint and several broken windows. He knew that complex. He'd grown up in a place like it, on the other side of town, before a scholarship changed his life. "Listen, boys," Richard began, but was interrupted by the arrival of a woman. "Ethan, Michael!" the woman shouted, running toward them. She was young, maybe 25, but her face showed the marks of exhaustion. "How many times have I told you not to talk to strangers?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. The woman reached them, breathless, and pulled the boys close. Her eyes held a mix of fear and shame as she looked at Richard, clearly recognizing he belonged to a world far removed from hers. "I'm sorry, sir, they don't know any better," she murmured, avoiding direct eye contact. "No need to apologize," Richard replied gently. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you. I'm Richard Thompson." The name didn't register on the woman's face, which somehow relieved Richard. He was tired of being known only for his wealth. "I'm Amanda," she answered hesitantly. "Amanda Miller. These are my boys." "Mom, the mister has a nice car," Ethan interrupted, still fascinated by the Lexus. "And I asked if he could take Michael to eat." Amanda paled, clearly mortified. "Ethan, you can't go around asking people for food." "But Michael's hungry, Mom." The silence that followed was heavy. Richard could see the tears forming in Amanda's eyes and the way she squared her shoulders to keep from crying in front of her children. "Listen, Amanda," Richard said carefully. "How about you all join me for lunch? There's a restaurant here at the mall." "No, sir. We can't accept," Amanda replied quickly. "We're not beggars." "I know you're not," Richard insisted. "But your children are hungry, and I was actually looking for company for lunch." Amanda looked at her children, then at Richard. He could see the internal struggle in her eyes. Pride battling necessity. "Please," Richard added softly. "Just lunch." After several minutes of hesitation, Amanda finally agreed. The group made their way inside the mall, an unusual procession, the well-dressed businessman walking alongside the young mother and her 2 barefoot children. At the restaurant, Richard discreetly watched as the boys ate with the appetite of those who were truly starving. Amanda ate little, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but her eyes never left her children. "How long have you been out of work?" Richard asked gently. 3 months, Amanda admitted, pushing food around her plate. "I worked at a clothing store, but it closed. Since then, I've only managed odd jobs. And the children's father?" Amanda's face closed off. "He hasn't been part of our lives for 2 years." Richard understood not to press further. Instead, he observed the boys more closely. Ethan was clearly protective of his younger brother, cutting food for Michael and making sure he drank water. There was a maturity in his eyes that shouldn't have been there in a 5-year-old. "Do you go to school, Ethan?" Richard asked. "I did," the boy replied, his mouth full of rice. "But Mum said we had to stop for a while." Amanda looked away, shame evident on her face. Richard guessed there was likely no money for uniforms, school supplies, or transportation. "And do you like studying?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "I love it. I can read some words, and the teacher at school said I'm smart." Richard felt that tightness in his chest again. There was something in the boy's determination that reminded him of himself as a child, when studying had been his only hope of escaping poverty. After lunch, Richard walked the family back to the housing complex. Amanda's apartment was on the second floor of a building clearly in need of repairs. The paint was peeling, and some windows were cracked. "Thank you for lunch, Mr. Richard," Amanda said at the door, "but we can't accept any more favors." "I understand," Richard replied, "but may I leave my card, in case you need anything?" Amanda hesitated, but eventually took it. "I'll pay you back for lunch as soon as I find work. Don't worry about it," Richard said, though he could see his words only deepened her discomfort. When Richard returned home that night, he couldn't get the family out of his mind. His 5,000-square-foot mansion in Phoenix's most exclusive neighborhood had never felt so empty. He ate dinner alone, as usual, served by Mrs. Jenkins, who had worked for him for 15 years. "You seem different today," observed Mrs. Jenkins, a 60-year-old woman who knew him better than anyone. "I met a family today," Richard said, pushing food around his plate. "2 children, they're struggling." Mrs. Jenkins stopped setting the table and looked at him with interest. In all her years working there, she had rarely seen Richard take a personal interest in anyone. "Would you like to tell me about it?" Richard then recounted the entire encounter, from Ethan's initial approach to their goodbye at the housing complex. Mrs. Jenkins listened in silence, nodding her head at times. "Those children touched you, didn't they?" she said when he finished. "Yes," Richard admitted, "and I don't know why." "I do," Mrs. Jenkins smiled sadly, "because you saw yourself in them." Richard stopped eating and looked at her. Mrs. Jenkins was one of the few people who knew his story, who understood where he'd come from before becoming the successful businessman he was today. "Maybe," he murmured. "Have you thought about helping them?" "I have, but it's complicated. Their mother is proud, she won't accept charity, and I don't know how to handle children." Mrs. Jenkins smiled. "You were a child once, and you remember what it was like to need help and not find it." That night, Richard stayed up late, thinking about their conversation. He truly saw himself in the boys, especially in Ethan, with his early determination and protective instinct toward his younger brother. But he also remembered his own mother, a proud woman who worked 3 jobs to support her children, and who had died too young, worn down by a hard life. The next day, Richard couldn't focus on work. He had 3 important meetings, but his mind kept drifting to the housing complex across town. During lunch, he made an impulsive decision and drove there. He found Ethan and Michael playing in the courtyard, supervised by an elderly woman who lived on the ground floor. Amanda wasn't home. "Hey, mister with the nice car!" Ethan shouted when he saw him. "Hey, champ," Richard replied, crouching down. "Where's your mum?" "She went looking for work," Ethan answered. "Mrs. Wilson is watching us." The elderly woman approached, clearly curious about Richard's presence. "Are you a friend of Amanda's?" "Something like that," Richard replied diplomatically. "I'm Richard Thompson." "Mrs. Helen Wilson," she introduced herself. "I've lived here for 20 years. I've known Amanda since she arrived, pregnant with Ethan. She's a good girl, hard-working, but life hasn't been easy for her." Richard watched the children play. Ethan had found a piece of chalk and was teaching Michael how to write letters on the ground. Even without resources, the boy kept his eagerness to learn. "She doesn't accept help easily," Richard remarked. "She's proud, just like her mother," Mrs. Wilson sighed. Amanda lost her parents in an accident when Ethan was a baby. Since then, she's been on her own. Richard felt a new wave of admiration for the young mother. Raising 2 children alone with no family to lean on at 25, it took a strength he deeply respected. Mrs. Wilson, he said carefully, do you think she'd accept a job if I offered one? Depends on the job, the woman replied pragmatically. Amanda isn't foolish. If it's serious work, she'll take it. But if it looks like disguised charity, she won't accept it, even if the boys are starving. Richard grew thoughtful. He needed to find a way to help that wouldn't wound Amanda's pride, but would truly make a difference for the family. When Amanda returned in the afternoon, she found Richard talking with Mrs. Wilson while watching the children play. Her face showed surprise and a hint of irritation. Mr. Thompson, what are you doing here? Hi, Amanda. He stood up. I came to make a proposal. I already told you I don't need charity, she replied coldly. It's not charity, Richard insisted. It's work. My company needs someone to organize files and handle basic administrative tasks. I thought of you. Amanda studied him skeptically. What kind of work exactly? Document organization, filing, some computer tasks. Nothing too complicated, but it requires someone trustworthy and detail-oriented. And why me? Richard took a deep breath. Because I need someone I can trust, and you strike me as a serious and responsible person. Amanda kept looking at him, clearly trying to figure out if there was a catch. What's the salary? Richard mentioned an amount that was fair for the type of work, but that he knew would completely change the family's situation. He saw Amanda's eyes widen slightly. Are you serious? Completely serious. You can start Monday if you want. Amanda glanced at her children, who had stopped playing and were listening to the conversation. I'll need to find someone to look after them. Mrs. Wilson can take care of them, the elderly woman offered immediately. It's been a while since I've had little ones to fuss over. At that moment, Richard saw the first crack in Amanda's armor of pride. Tears began to form in her eyes. I accept, she said softly. Thank you. No need to thank me, Richard replied. I'm the one who's gaining here. I really do need someone in the office. But when Amanda turned to hug her children, Richard realized he had just emotionally entangled himself in a way he hadn't anticipated. The silent gratitude in her eyes, Ethan's restrained joy, and Michael's innocent smile touched parts of his heart he'd kept locked away for years. On Sunday, Richard spent the day preparing a space in the office for Amanda. His company, Thompson Enterprises, occupied 3 floors of a commercial building in downtown Phoenix. He set up a desk near the reception area in a pleasant yet professional environment. On Monday morning, Amanda arrived promptly at 8 o'clock. She wore a simple but neat dress, clearly her best outfit. Richard noticed she had made a special effort with her appearance. Good morning, Amanda, he greeted her. Ready to start? Yes, sir, she replied, visibly nervous. Richard introduced Amanda to the other employees and explained her duties. She would be responsible for organizing the company's old files, digitizing outdated documents, and handling some basic administrative tasks. It was real, necessary work, not disguised charity. During the first week, Richard observed Amanda at work. She was incredibly dedicated, arriving early and leaving late, clearly determined to prove her worth. She had a natural sense of organization and an eye for detail that impressed even the most seasoned employees. She's good, Debbie, the receptionist, remarked. She organized in a week what had been a mess for months. Richard smiled, pleased with his decision. But he was also realizing that his motivation for helping the family was becoming more complicated than he'd initially imagined. At the end of the first week, Richard found Amanda sorting through a stack of old contracts. She was focused, her brows furrowed in concentration, and he watched for a few minutes before announcing himself. How are you settling in? He asked. Amanda looked up, flushing at being caught off guard. Very well, thank you. The work is interesting. And the kids, how are they? Happy, she smiled, and Richard realized it was the first time he'd seen her smile genuinely. Ethan asks every day when he can come see where Mummy works. You can bring them on Saturday if you'd like, Richard offered. I usually come in for a few hours on weekends. We wouldn't want to intrude. It wouldn't be an intrusion, Richard insisted. I'd like to see them again. The following Saturday, Amanda showed up with both boys. Ethan was clearly impressed by the office, running from one window to another, marveling at the city view. Michael, shyer, stayed close to his mother. Wow, Mom, you work in such a tall place, Ethan exclaimed. Richard chuckled at the boys' excitement. Want to see from the top? He offered, pointing to the building's terrace. On the terrace, Ethan was mesmerized by the panoramic view of Phoenix. Can we see our house from here? I think so. Richard pointed toward the housing complex, roughly over there. One day I'm going to have an office like this, Ethan declared with the absolute conviction of a child. Richard smiled, but something in the boy's determined tone touched him deeply. I'm sure you will. Will you teach me? The question caught Richard off guard. Teach you what? How to get an office, and a nice car, and help other people like you helped us. Richard glanced at Amanda, who was watching the conversation with an unreadable expression. First, you need to study hard, he told Ethan. Studying is the most important thing. I like studying, but I can't go to school right now. Why not? Because Mom doesn't have money for school supplies. Richard felt that familiar tightness in his chest. How about we talk about that later? Later, while the children played in the office lounge, Richard spoke with Amanda about the boys' education. Ethan needs to go back to school, he said directly. I know, Amanda sighed, but I need to save up for supplies, uniforms, transportation. What if I advanced part of your salary? I can't go deeper into debt than I already am with your generosity, she replied firmly. Richard admired her dignity, but also felt frustrated. It's not debt, Amanda. It's an investment in Ethan's future. For you, maybe. For me, it's another favor I don't know if I'll ever repay. Richard was starting to realize that helping this family would be more complicated than he'd imagined. Amanda's pride, though admirable, was becoming an obstacle to effectively supporting the children. By the end of the first month, Amanda had completely transformed the office's organization. Documents lost for years were found and catalogued. The old files became a model of efficiency. You should consider studying business administration, Richard suggested during one of their now routine casual conversations. Study? Amanda laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Mr. Richard, I barely finished high school. I had Ethan at 19. So? That doesn't mean you can't study now. When? I work 8 hours, take care of 2 kids, keep up the house. When is there time to study? Richard realized he was being naive. Amanda's life was a constant race against time and basic needs. Dreams like higher education seemed like unattainable luxuries. It was during this time that Richard began to understand his connection to the family went beyond simple charity. He was growing attached not just to the children, but to Amanda herself. Her determination, her quiet strength, the way she protected her kids without ever complaining about their hard life. But Richard was also discovering that caring was dangerous. There was a reason he'd kept emotional distance from everything and everyone for so many years. The memory of his own lost family still ached. 20 years earlier, Richard had been married with a young daughter. A car accident had taken his wife and child on a rainy night while he worked late at the office as usual. Guilt and grief had built emotional walls no one had ever broken through, until now. Watching Ethan and Michael run around the office, on weekends Richard felt those walls trembling, and it scared him. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, a month and a half after Amanda started working, Richard received a phone call that would change everything. It was about a private investigator he had hired years earlier for a company case. Mr. Thompson, this is Detective Roberts. You asked me to look into your employee Amanda Miller. Richard paled. He had completely forgotten that following company protocol, he had requested a background check on Amanda when he hired her. Yes, did you find anything? I found some interesting information. The lady has a clean record, but there are some family matters you should know about. Richard felt a chill in his stomach. What kind of matters? The children's father isn't just absent, he's serving time for drug trafficking. He was arrested 2 years ago and is due for parole in 6 months. Richard fell silent, processing the information. There's more, the detective continued. From the records I obtained, he's tried contacting Amanda several times from prison. She never responded, but recently he's been talking to other inmates about reuniting with his family when he gets out. What exactly does that mean? It means he might try to force his way back in. Men like him usually don't take rejection well. Richard hung up the phone, his mind in turmoil. Amanda had never mentioned that the children's father was in prison, only that he wasn't part of their lives. Now he understood why. Over the next few days, Richard watched Amanda with new eyes. He noticed small signs he'd overlooked before. How she always checked that the doors were locked. How tense she became when a stranger appeared at the office. How she avoided sharing details about her past. Richard wrestled with whether to tell Amanda about the detective's call or keep quiet. Part of him wanted to protect her, but another part knew she had a right to know he'd looked into her life. The decision was taken out of his hands when, a week later, Amanda arrived at work, visibly shaken. "Amanda, what happened?" Richard asked, noticing her trembling hands as she tried to organize papers on her desk. "Nothing, Mr. Thompson, just a bad night's sleep." "Doesn't seem like just that to me." Amanda stopped pretending and looked at him with eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I got a letter yesterday from Jason." Richard's stomach tightened. "Jason, the boy's father. He's been in prison for 2 years, but he's never written before. Now he's saying he wants to reunite with the family when he gets out." Richard took a deep breath. "Amanda, I need to tell you something." He recounted the investigation he'd ordered and the information he'd received. He watched Amanda's expression shift through a range of emotions: betrayal, anger, fear, understanding. "You had me investigated?" she asked when he finished. "It's company protocol for new hires," Richard explained, though he knew it sounded like an excuse. "But I'd completely forgotten until the detective called. What else did he find out about my life?" "Just that, and that you have a clean record, no significant debts or legal issues." Amanda was silent for several minutes, clearly processing everything. "Do you think I lied to you?" "No," Richard answered honestly. "I think you left out details to protect yourself and the children, and I understand why." "Jason," she began, then stopped. "When I got pregnant with Ethan, he was different, or so I thought. He had a job, he was affectionate, but after Michael was born, he started changing. He'd disappear for days, come back with money he couldn't explain." Richard listened quietly. "When I found out he was involved with drugs, I tried to make him stop. But he said it was temporary, that he needed the money. 3 months later, he was arrested. And I felt relieved." "Why relieved?" "Because I was afraid of him, of what he was becoming. And she was afraid for the boy's future, growing up near that kind of life." Richard began to understand Amanda's true strength. Not only had she raised the children alone, but she'd made the difficult decision to completely cut ties with their father to protect them. And now he wants to come back? His letter talks about starting over, being a family again. "But I don't want that, Mr. Richard. Not for me, and especially not for the boys." "What do you plan to do?" "I don't know," she admitted. "He's out in 6 months, and knowing Jason, he won't easily accept that we don't want him back." Richard felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him. The thought of someone threatening Amanda and the children awakened instincts he didn't know he still had. "You don't have to face this alone," he said. "Mr. Richard, I already owe you so much. I can't. This isn't about debt, Amanda. It's about..." He paused, searching for the right words. "It's about caring for you all." The look she gave him was long and intense. Richard saw surprise, gratitude, and something else he chose not to interpret at that moment. In the following days, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Amanda's situation. He'd built his fortune by being pragmatic and calculating, but now he found himself making purely emotional decisions. He decided to seek legal help. He scheduled an appointment with Dr. Edward Mills, a family law attorney who had worked for his company in the past. "Richard, good to see you," Dr. Edward greeted him in his office. "Heard you're helping a family. Not really your style." Richard smiled slightly. "People change, Edward. I need advice on a delicate situation." He explained everything. Amanda, the children, the ex-partner in prison, and the threat of his return. "Legally, he has rights as the children's father," Dr. Edward explained. "But if Amanda can prove he poses a danger to them, she might get a restraining order." What kind of proof would she need? History of domestic violence, drug use, neglect? Unfortunately, just being involved in trafficking might not be enough if he convinces the judge he's changed. Richard left the appointment more worried than before. The law didn't always protect the vulnerable, as he knew from experience. That night at home, Richard talked to Mrs. Jenkins about the situation. "You're falling in love with her," the housekeeper observed bluntly. Richard nearly choked on his coffee. "What? With Amanda, you're in love, and with the children too, in your own way." "Don't be ridiculous, Mrs. Jenkins. I'm just helping a family in need." "Richard Howard Thompson," she said, using his full name as she did when she wanted to be taken seriously. "I've worked for you for 15 years. I've never seen you care this much about anyone, not even your own brothers." Richard fell silent. His brothers lived in other states and rarely spoke. After the tragedy with his wife and daughter, he'd pushed everyone away. "What if I am?" he asked softly. "Then it's about time. You've suffered enough for 20 years. But what if I lose them too?" Mrs. Jenkins sat beside him at the kitchen table. "Richard, you didn't lose your family because you cared about them. You lost them to a terrible accident, and ever since you've been living as if you're dead inside. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is. You're afraid to love again because you're afraid to hurt again. But look at you. You're already hurting. You've been hurting from loneliness for 20 years. Mrs. Jenkins' words echoed in Richard's mind for days. She was right. He was falling for Amanda and growing attached to the children in a way he hadn't experienced in decades. But he was also terrified. 2 weeks after the conversation with the lawyer, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He decided to invite Amanda and the children for a weekend at his country house. "A weekend?" Amanda repeated, surprised. "I have a small house in the mountains near Lake Tahoe. I thought you might enjoy getting out of the city for a bit." Amanda hesitated. "Mr. Richard, that would be what? Too personal, too intimate." Richard realized she was right, but he also realized that was exactly what he wanted. He wanted to get to know her better, away from the formal office environment. He wanted to see the children playing in a safe and beautiful place. "There are separate rooms," he said, "and it would be good for the boys to experience some nature." Amanda looked out the office window toward the housing complex where they lived. They've never seen real mountains. Then it settled. On Saturday morning, Richard picked up the family at their home. It was the first time he'd entered Amanda's apartment, and he was struck by what he saw. Despite the obvious poverty, the small 2-bedroom apartment was impeccably clean and organized. Amanda had managed to create a warm atmosphere with very little. There were children's drawings on the walls, a few plants by the window, and everything was in its place. "What a lovely home," Richard said sincerely. "Thank you," Amanda blushed. "I know it's simple, but..." "It's not simple. It's a home," Richard corrected her. "There's a big difference." During the drive to the mountains, Richard watched in the rearview mirror as the children reacted to the changing scenery. As they left the city behind and the mountains appeared on the horizon, Ethan grew more and more excited. "Mom, look how big those mountains are," he shouted. "They're taller than the buildings." Michael, still too young to fully understand what he was seeing, simply smiled at his brother's excitement. Richard's mountain house was relatively simple compared to his city mansion, but it was still impressive by Amanda's standards. It had 3 bedrooms, a living room with a fireplace, a fully equipped kitchen, and a porch overlooking the valley. "It's beautiful," Amanda whispered as they stepped out of the car. "It was my ex-wife's favorite place," Richard said without thinking, then regretted mentioning his past. "Ex-wife?" Amanda asked. Richard realized he had never told her about his lost family. "She passed away 20 years ago, along with my daughter." The silence that followed was heavy. Amanda looked at him with new understanding in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said, softly. "It was a long time ago," Richard replied, carrying the bags. But over the weekend, Richard realized it hadn't been that long. 20 years of self-imposed solitude hadn't healed the wound, only hidden it. Watching Ethan and Michael run around the property, exploring every corner of the garden, brought back painful, but also sweet memories of his daughter, Emily, who would have been Amanda's age if she were alive. On Sunday morning, Richard found Amanda on the porch drinking coffee and watching the children play in the garden. "They're happy," she remarked. "You seem more relaxed too." "It's the first weekend in years where I haven't worried about money for food or bills to pay." Richard sat beside her. "That must be exhausting." "It is, but it's also worth it for them," she gestured toward the boys. "Amanda," Richard began, then hesitated. "What?" "Nothing. Forget it." But Amanda didn't forget. "Richard, can I ask you a personal question?" It was the first time she had called him by his first name, and he noticed. "Of course. Why did you never remarry? I mean, after, Richard was silent for a long time. "Fear," he finally admitted. "Fear of loving and losing again." "And now? Now what? Are you still afraid?" Richard looked at her, then at the children playing. "More than ever," he admitted, "because now I have so much more to lose." The glance they exchanged was intense and full of unspoken meaning. Richard saw in Amanda the same swirl of emotions he felt: gratitude, affection, something deeper beginning to bloom. But he also saw fear. Fear of growing attached to someone who might vanish from her life. Fear of mixing financial dependence with real feelings. The weekend ended too soon for everyone. On the drive back to the city, the children fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from all the playing and exploring. "Thank you," Amanda said softly. "It was perfect. We can do this again whenever you'd like." "Richard," she began, then stopped. "What is it?" "Nothing. It's complicated." Richard understood. Everything between them was becoming complicated. He was her boss, her benefactor, and now potentially something more. The lines were blurring in a way that could be dangerous for both of them. On Monday, back at the office, there was a different tension between them, not uncomfortable but charged with unexplored possibilities. It was that same week when Richard received another call that would change everything again. "Mr. Thompson?" It was Detective Robert's voice. "I have news about Jason Rogers. Was he released?" "No, sir. But he was granted temporary leave for his mother's funeral. And according to my sources, he didn't return to prison on the scheduled date." Richard felt his blood run cold. He escaped? Technically, he violated the terms of his temporary release. There's already a search warrant out, but he knows the city and could stay hidden for a while. What about Amanda's family? "No contact yet, but I'd keep watch. Men like him usually go straight for what they consider theirs." Richard hung up, his mind racing. He needed to tell Amanda, but he also needed to take steps to protect her. When Amanda arrived at the office, Richard called her in for a private conversation. "I need to tell you something important," he began. He watched her face pale as he relayed the detective's call. "He escaped," she whispered. "Technically, he didn't return from his temporary leave. But yes, he's out." Amanda sank heavily into a chair. "I knew this would happen, I knew it. You and the kids can't go home tonight. Richard, I can't just... You can stay at my place for as long as needed." "I can't accept that. Amanda, this isn't about pride, it's about protection." He saw the internal struggle in her eyes. Finally, the children's safety won out over her pride. "All right," she agreed, "but only until this gets resolved." That afternoon, Richard went with Amanda to her apartment to gather some things. He waited in the car while she and the children packed essential clothes and personal items. As they were leaving the building, Mrs. Wilson intercepted them. "Amanda, dear, a man came looking for you today." Richard saw Amanda tense. "What man?" "He said his name was Jason. Asked where you were, what time you'd be back. I told him I didn't know anything." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson." "Be careful, dear. He didn't seem well, agitated, nervous." In the car, Richard noticed Amanda was trembling slightly. "Does he already know where you work?" he asked. "I don't know. I never told anyone from the old neighborhood where I'm working now." "Good. That gives us some advantage." That evening at Richard's house, the children were thrilled by the size of the place, especially the backyard pool. To them, it was like staying in a luxury hotel, but Richard noticed Amanda barely touched her dinner and kept glancing nervously at the windows. "He doesn't know where you are," Richard said gently when they were alone in the living room. "For now. But Jason is clever. He's determined when he wants something. Tell me more about him. What was he like when you were together?" Amanda hesitated, clearly reluctant to relive painful memories. "At first, he was affectionate, made me feel special, protected. I was very young and my parents had just passed away. I was alone and scared." Richard listened in silence. "But after Ethan was born, he started to change, became possessive, controlling, wanted to know where I was every minute. Then came the drugs and he grew paranoid, aggressive." "Was he ever violent with you?" Amanda took a long time to answer. "A few times. Nothing too serious, just some shoving when he was upset. But I could see in his eyes it could get worse." Richard felt a cold anger rising inside him. The thought of someone hurting Amanda enraged him in a way he hadn't felt in years. And with the kids? He never physically hurt them, but he yelled a lot and Ethan was afraid of him. That was one reason I felt relieved when he was arrested. That night, Richard barely slept. He listened for any strange noises, checked the door locks, and thought about security systems he could install. The next day, Monday, Richard decided to hire private security. He called a specialized company and hired 2 guards, one for the office during the day and another for his house at night. "Richard, this is overkill," Amanda protested when she saw the guard at the office. "I'd rather overdo protection than regret it later." During the week, the family adjusted to life at Richard's house. The kids discovered the library and were fascinated by the number of books. Ethan, especially, spent hours looking at picture books. Richard started teaching him a few words and was impressed by how quickly the boy learned. "He's very smart," he remarked to Amanda. "Takes after his father," she said, then made a face. "I mean, not Jason, my father. He was a teacher." "You don't talk much about your parents. They died when I was 19 in a car accident. It was a very hard time." Richard understood. Tragedies that came unexpectedly and changed everything in an instant. He knew that pain well. "How did you get through it?" "I don't know if I did. I think I just learned to live with it. And when Ethan was born, I realized I had bigger responsibilities than my own grief." Richard admired once again Amanda's quiet strength. She had faced loss, loneliness, poverty, an abusive relationship, and yet she kept fighting for her children. That Friday, Richard got another call from Detective Roberts. "We have news about Jason Rogers. He was seen near your company's office." "What do you mean?" "One of the security cameras on the block caught him watching the building for about an hour yesterday afternoon." Richard felt a chill in his stomach. "He knows where she works." "Seems so. I'd suggest tightening security." When Richard told Amanda about the call, she was visibly shaken. "He found me," she whispered. "But he didn't hurt you and he won't, not while I'm around." "Richard, you don't understand. Jason, when he wants something, he doesn't give up easily." "Neither do I," Richard replied, with a firmness that surprised them both. That weekend, Richard decided to take the family to the mountain house again. He thought it would be safer, more isolated. It was during that weekend that everything changed between him and Amanda. On Saturday night, after the kids were asleep, they sat on the porch to talk. The mountain air was crisp and the sky was full of stars. "Ethan asked me today if you're going to be his new dad," Amanda said softly. Richard felt his heart race. "What did you say?" "That life is complicated and some things take time to happen." "And what would you like to happen?" Amanda looked at him for a long moment. "I'm afraid, Richard." "Afraid of what?" "Of getting used to this life with you and then losing everything. And I'm afraid of falling in love again and spending the rest of my life afraid of losing someone I love." "Again?" she asked softly. "Again," he confirmed, looking directly into her eyes. The kiss that followed was inevitable. Gentle, hesitant at first, then more intense as they both surrendered to the feelings that had been growing for months. When they pulled apart, Richard saw tears in Amanda's eyes. "Why are you crying?" "Because it's been a long time since I've felt safe enough to fall in love." "And now you do?" "With you, yes." They stayed embraced on the porch until late, talking about dreams, fears, and possibilities. Richard shared more about his lost family, and Amanda opened up about memories of her parents and details of her abusive relationship with Jason. "If we're really together," Richard said, "I want to adopt the children. I want them to legally be my daughters too." "Richard, you don't have to answer now. I just want you to know that's what I want. A family, again." On Sunday, as they were preparing to return to the city, Richard received a call that chilled him to the bone. "Mr. Thompson?" It was Mrs. Jenkins, clearly nervous. "There's a man here looking for Amanda. He says he's the children's father." "What? How did he find my address?" "I don't know, sir. But he's very agitated. He's demanding to speak to her." Richard looked at Amanda, who had overheard part of the conversation and had gone. "C'est late, Sevi. Jenkins, call the security at the gated community. Don't let him in under any circumstances. We're on our way." During the drive back, Amanda was silent, clearly terrified. The children sensed the tension and were quieter than usual. "How did he find out where you live?" she asked. "I don't know, but we'll figure it out." When they arrived at the community, they found Jason being escorted out by security. Richard saw him for the first time, a man in his 30s, thin, with a nervous and aggressive glare. When Jason spotted Richard's car, he started shouting, "Amanda, Amanda, I know you're in there. I'm the father of my children." Richard felt Amanda shrink into the passenger seat. "Stay in the car," he said, stepping out. "Richard, don't..." But he was already walking toward Jason. "You must be the rich guy bankrolling my family," Jason said with contempt. "I'm Richard Thompson, and you're trespassing on private property." "Private property?" Jason laughed bitterly. "My wife and kids are in there, and you're talking about private property. Your ex-wife and her children are under my protection. If you come near them again, I'll call the police." "Protection?" Jason stepped closer, clearly, trying to intimidate Richard. "You think you can buy my family? I'm not buying anyone. I'm giving them something you never did. Safety and respect." Richard saw the anger flare in Jason's eyes, but security stepped between them. "This isn't over," Jason yelled as he was led away. "They're mine. You'll give me back my family." When Richard returned to the car, he found Amanda trembling and the children frightened. "Mommy, who was that angry man?" Ethan asked. "No one important, sweetheart," Amanda replied, struggling to steady her voice. But Richard knew Jason had achieved what he wanted, to plant fear and disrupt the peace they were building. That night, after the children were asleep, Richard and Amanda talked about their next steps. "He won't give up," she said. "I know Jason. For him, this is about pride now. Then we need to make things official. Legally." "What do you mean?" "Marriage, adopting the children, making it all legal and permanent." Amanda looked at him in surprise. "Richard, are you serious?" "Completely serious. If we're married and I'm the legal father of the children, it'll be much harder for him to cause trouble." "But this is so sudden. People will say it's just for convenience." "And what if it is?" Richard asked. "If it's for convenience, but also for love, what's the problem?" Amanda fell silent for a long moment. "What if it doesn't work? What if we don't work as a couple? What if it does? What if we're happy?" Richard saw the struggle in her eyes, the fear of fully surrendering battling against the desire for security and love. "I need to think," she finally said. "How much time do you need?" "A few days. I need to be sure I'm making this decision for the right reasons." Richard respected her request, but in the days that followed, the tension was palpable. Jason had disappeared again, but his presence lingered. Richard hired more security, installed extra alarms, but he knew the fear wouldn't fade until the situation was resolved for good. It was on Wednesday that everything exploded. Richard was in a meeting when he got an urgent call from Debbie, the receptionist. "Mr. Richard, There's a man here demanding to speak to Amanda. He says he's the children's father and has legal rights. Where's Amanda? In the records room, but she heard the commotion and is afraid to come out. I'm on my way, don't let him near her. Richard cancelled the meeting and rushed to the office. When he arrived, he found Jason arguing with security at the front desk. You again, Richard said. This time I came prepared, Jason replied, pulling papers from his pocket. I have a court order recognizing my rights as a father. I want to see my kids. Richard examined the documents. They were real. Jason had gotten a lawyer and secured supervised visitation. Where are the children? At school, Richard lied. In truth, the kids were at his house with Mrs. Jenkins, but he wasn't giving Jason that information. Then I'll wait here until they arrive. You can't stay here. This is a private workplace. And she's my ex-wife working here. I have a right to be where my family is. Richard realized Jason had prepared better this time. He'd studied his legal rights and was using the law to his advantage. Amanda finally stepped out of the records room, visibly nervous but determined to face the situation. Jason, she said firmly. What do you want? Hey, sweetheart, Jason smiled, but there was something cruel in his expression. I came to get my family back. We're not your family anymore. The kids are. And you, well, you'll always be the mother of my children. Richard saw the way Jason looked at Amanda, possessive and threatening, and felt anger rising inside him. Amanda, you don't have to talk to him here, Richard intervened. Oh, the protective rich guy, Jason turned to him. You know what? Thanks for taking care of my family while I was gone, but I can take over now. They're not your property, Richard shot back. They're my kids, my woman, and you're just a lonely guy with money trying to buy a ready-made family. The accusation hit Richard like a punch, not because it was true, but because it touched his deepest insecurities. Enough, Amanda said firmly. Jason, you lost the right to have a say in my life when you chose drugs over your family. I've changed, Amanda. These 2 years made me think. I want to be a better father, a better man. It's too late. For our kids, it's never too late. Richard watched Amanda's expression. He saw doubt beginning to flicker in her eyes. She didn't doubt her feelings for Jason, but she doubted her right to deny her children the chance to know their biological father. I need to think, she said. There's nothing to think about, Richard said quickly. He had his chance and lost it. Richard, they're my children, my decision. Amanda's tone was sharp, and Richard realized he was being too possessive, but the fear of losing the family he was building was making him act irrationally. See? Jason smiled with satisfaction. Even she knows you're overreacting. You're not their father, man. Just a rich stranger who showed up in their lives. Richard felt the words like daggers, because technically Jason was right. Richard really was a stranger who had appeared in their lives just a few months ago. Amanda, Jason continued, pressing his advantage. I just want a chance to prove I've changed, that I can be the father our kids deserve. And if you haven't changed, if you're the same person as before, then you can send me away again. But at least, give the boys a chance to know me. They deserve to have a real father. Richard saw Amanda hesitate. Maternal guilt was being manipulated by Jason, who clearly knew exactly which buttons to push. I need to think, she repeated. Fine, Jason agreed magnanimously. I'll give you until the end of the week. But I want an answer, Amanda. And I want to see my kids. After Jason left, the office was tense. Richard was visibly shaken, and Amanda seemed torn between conflicting emotions. Are you really considering giving him a chance? Richard asked when they were alone. Richard, they're his children. Biologically, he has rights. Rights he abandoned when he chose a life of crime. But what if he really has changed? What if denying him this chance is a mistake? Richard felt panic rising. Amanda, you can't be serious. I'm thinking about the boys, about what's best for them. What's best for them is stability, safety, love, things he never gave. And you've given that in 4 months? The question was like a slap. Richard realized Amanda wasn't just questioning the situation with Jason, but their relationship too. "I've tried," he replied softly. "I know, and I'm grateful. But Richard, you have to understand, I can't make decisions about my children based only on the fear of losing what we have." That night at home, the tension was palpable. The children sensed something was wrong, though they didn't understand what. Richard could barely eat dinner. The possibility of losing Amanda and the kids was consuming him in a way he hadn't expected. "Can I ask you something?" Amanda said when they were alone in the living room. "Of course. Do you love me? Or do you love the idea of having a family again?" The question caught him off guard. "Why are you asking that?" "Because I need to know if what I feel for you is real or just gratitude mixed with financial dependence." Richard looked at her for a long moment. "I love you. I love your strength, your determination, the way you protect your children. I love how you're proud but not arrogant, how you work hard without complaining. And yes, I also love the idea of having a family again, but I specifically love the family that you and the kids are." "And I love you too," she replied, surprising him. "But I'm afraid my love might be tainted by gratitude and the security you represent. It doesn't matter how it started. It matters what it's become." "But it does matter, Richard. Because if Jason has really changed, if he can offer the boys a stable life, I might be denying them the right to have their real father because of my feelings for you." Richard felt the world crumbling around him. "So what do you plan to do?" "I'm going to give him a chance, a supervised, limited chance, to see if he's really changed." "What about us?" Amanda hesitated. "I need some time, Richard, to think, to be sure I'm making the right decisions for the right reasons." Richard nodded, though every fiber of his being screamed to protest. "How much time?" "I don't know. Maybe a few weeks. Maybe more." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He stayed in the living room, staring out the window, thinking about how everything had changed so quickly. That morning, he had a family. Now he was alone again. The next day, Amanda took the children and went back to the apartment in the housing complex. Richard offered to keep paying for security, but she refused. "I need to do this on my own," she said. "I need to find out if I can be strong without your protection." Richard respected her decision, but discreetly instructed Detective Roberts to keep watch over the family. The following days were the longest of Richard's life. He tried to focus on work, but his mind was constantly with Amanda and the children. A week later, Amanda called. "Richard, I need to talk to you." "Of course. Do you want me to come over?" "No, can we meet at the park near the mall where we first met?" Richard arrived at the park with his heart racing. He found Amanda sitting on a bench looking tired and worried. "How are the kids?" were his first words. "They're fine, they miss you." Richard felt relief mixed with pain. "And you, how are you?" "Confused, scared, alone." "And Jason?" Amanda took a deep breath. He really seems to have changed. He's working, living in a simple but clean boarding house. He's been trying to be kind to the kids." Richard's heart sank. So I realized something important." "What?" "That no matter how much he's changed, I don't love him anymore. And more importantly, I realized you're not trying to buy a family. You're offering real love." Richard looked at her, hope swelling in his chest. "Richard, I love you. Not out of gratitude, not for financial security. I love you because you reminded me I can be more than just a mother struggling to survive. You reminded me I can be a woman, dream, have hope." "Amanda, let me finish. I told Jason he can visit the kids, but our family is different now. Our family is me, you, Ethan, and Michael." Richard pulled her into a hug, feeling tears in his own eyes. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I want to marry you, Richard. I want you to adopt the children. I want us to build a life together." The proposal that followed was simple and emotional. Richard knelt right there in the park, in front of a few curious onlookers, and asked Amanda to marry him. "Amanda Miller, will you marry me? Not for convenience, not for security, but for love." "Yes," she answered, crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, I will." When they went back to pick up the children at the apartment, they found Jason waiting by the building's entrance. "So that's it?" he asked, seeing them hand in hand. "That's it," Amanda confirmed. You can visit the kids, Jason. They have a right to know their father. But our story is over. And you think this rich guy will make you happy? I know he will. Jason glared at Richard with anger, but also with defeated resignation. Take good care of them, he finally said, because if you hurt them, you'll have to deal with me. You don't need to worry about that, Richard replied calmly. 3 months later, Richard and Amanda married in a simple ceremony with only the children, Mrs. Jenkins, Mrs. Wilson, and a few close friends present. Ethan was the proud ring bearer in his first suit. Michael scattered petals down the aisle, more interested in playing with the flowers than the ceremony itself. During their weekend honeymoon at the mountain house, Richard finally felt whole again. He wasn't replacing the family he had lost. He was building a new one with all the love and care he had to give. Richard, Amanda said on their first night as husband and wife, lying on the porch under the stars. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for letting me be part of your family. 6 months later, the adoption process for Ethan and Michael was finalized. Richard was now legally their father, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with it. Jason continued visiting the boys once a month, always supervised. Over time, he proved he had truly changed, even securing a steady job. His relationship with the children remained cordial but distant. He was more like an uncle than a father. Ethan, now 6, returned to school and quickly stood out. Richard discovered the boy had a natural talent for math and business, always eager to understand how things worked. "Daddy Richard," Ethan said one evening at dinner. It was the first time he had called Richard Dad. "Yes, champ?" "When I grow up, I want to have a company like yours, but I want to help kids like me and Michael." Richard smiled proudly. "Then let's start planning that right now." Michael, now 4, was shyer, but just as bright. He had developed a love for books and spent hours looking at the pictures in Richard's library. A year after the wedding, Amanda became pregnant. When they found out it was a girl, Richard cried with emotion. It felt like life was giving him a second chance to be a father to a daughter. "Should we name her Hope?" Amanda teased. "How about Grace?" Richard countered. "It was my grandmother's name. She always said family was the greatest wealth anyone could have." "Grace Thompson. I like it." When Grace was born, Richard held his daughter in his arms and knew his healing journey was finally complete. He hadn't forgotten his first family. He never would. But he had learned that the heart had an infinite capacity to love. Ethan and Michael instantly adored their sister. Ethan, now 7, took on the role of protective big brother, always checking on Grace. Michael, more sensitive, sang to her when she cried. "Now we're a real family," Ethan declared at the hospital, carefully holding his baby sister. "You've always been a real family," Richard gently corrected, "from the very first day." Jason continued visiting the boys, but his presence grew less frequent. Eventually, he moved to another city for a better job. Visits turned into phone calls, then birthday cards. The boys held a respectful fondness for him, but Richard was clearly their father in every way that mattered. 5 years after the wedding, Richard decided to expand his business differently. Instead of opening more companies, he created a scholarship program for underprivileged children, partnering with local private schools. "Why are you doing this?" Amanda asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because education changed my life. If it weren't for a scholarship, I'd never have escaped poverty." The program started small, with 5 children. But Richard found that helping other families gave him a satisfaction no business ever had. Ethan, now 12, often joined Richard on visits to the families they supported. The boy had developed remarkable maturity and a natural understanding of the struggles poor families faced. "Dad, that boy reminds me of how I used to be," Ethan remarked after visiting an especially needy family. "How so?" "Hungry, but trying not to show it. Ashamed of the situation, but too proud to ask for help directly." Richard looked at his adopted son with admiration. "And what do you think we should do?" "The same thing you did for me. Give them a chance, but let them keep their dignity." At 58, Richard finally felt at peace with himself. He had built a successful company, but more importantly, He had built a loving family and was helping other families find hope. Amanda had earned her business degree through night classes, with Richard watching the kids on the evenings she studied. Now she was his official partner in the company, overseeing social programs. "You know what's funny?" she said one night, watching the 3 children play in the yard. "What? If someone had told me 10 years ago that I'd be here, married to you, with 3 happy kids and a company to run, I'd have said it was impossible." "Why impossible?" "Because it felt like too big a dream to be real." Richard pulled her close. "The best dreams always seem impossible at first." That night, lying in bed, Richard thought about the journey that had brought them there. It had started with 2 barefoot children approaching his car in a parking lot. A simple phrase from a 5-year-old boy had changed everything. "Mister, I'll take my brother with you. He's hungry." Now, 7 years later, Richard knew he hadn't been the one to save Ethan and Michael. They had saved him. They had given him back the ability to love, to trust, to dream of the future. "Richard?" Amanda whispered in the dark. "Yes? Thank you for looking past our poverty, for seeing our potential. Thank you for teaching me that family isn't about blood or money. It's about choosing to love someone every day. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." From the children's room came the soft sounds of the 3 little ones sleeping. Ethan, now 12 and already dreaming of being an entrepreneur. Michael, 9 and in love with books. And Grace, 3 and the pure joy of the house. Richard closed his eyes, knowing he had finally found what he'd always been searching for without realizing it. The peace that comes from having people to love and who love you back, unconditionally. The company kept growing. The scholarship program helped hundreds of children over the years, and the Thompson family became known in the community, not for their wealth, but for their generosity. Ethan graduated with honors in business. Michael became a teacher like the grandfather he'd never met, and Grace followed in her mother's footsteps in business, focusing on social programs. But the true measure of Richard's success wasn't in financial numbers or company awards. It was in the photographs on the wall at home. Children's weddings, grandchildren playing in the same pool where Ethan and Michael had played as kids, family gatherings where everyone was present and happy. When Richard turned 70, the kids threw him a surprise party. During his thank you speech, he looked at the gathered family and said, "25 years ago, 2 children changed my life with a simple sentence. They taught me that true wealth isn't in what we own, but in what we share. It's not in what we achieve alone, but in what we build together." Ethan, now a 32-year-old man with children of his own, stood to respond. "Dad, you always say we changed your life. But you were the one who showed us that every child deserves a chance, that every family deserves hope, and that love is the only thing that truly multiplies when it's shared." That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Richard and Amanda sat on the porch as they had for decades. "Any regrets?" she asked playfully. "Just one," Richard answered seriously. "Which one?" "Not having met you all sooner." Amanda smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "I think we met at the right time, when we were all ready for the family we became." "You're right." They fell silent, watching the stars in the peaceful sky. Soon after, they heard bare footsteps in the house. It was Grace, now a young woman of 21, appearing on the porch carrying her 2-year-old son, Richard's grandson. "He woke up asking for Grandpa," she said, handing the child to Richard. The boy snuggled into his grandfather's lap and quickly fell back asleep. Richard looked at the peaceful little face and saw in it a bit of Ethan, a bit of Michael, a bit of Grace, a bit of Amanda. "The family keeps growing," Amanda observed, "and each new generation carries a piece of the other's stories," Richard added. When the child was sound asleep again, Grace took him back to the bedroom. Richard and Amanda stayed on the porch for a few more hours, talking about grandchildren, plans for the company, and the children they would still help through social programs. "Richard," Amanda said as it neared midnight. If you could go back in time, would you change anything?" Richard thought for a moment. "I'd change the tragedy that took my first family, but I wouldn't change what happened after. because every pain, every mistake, every hard moment brought me to you. Even the years of loneliness, especially the years of loneliness, they taught me to cherish what we have now. In the early hours of the morning, when they finally went to sleep, Richard knew his story had come full circle. It wasn't the story of a rich man who saved a poor family. It was the story of two people who saved each other, of children who taught an adult how to love again, of how true wealth is measured in smiles, hugs, and shared moments. And it all began with a simple phrase from a brave boy who wasn't afraid to ask for help when his little brother was hungry. A phrase that forever changed the lives of everyone involved. "Mister, take my brother with you. He's hungry." 40 years after that encounter in the parking lot, when Richard had retired and passed the company to his children, he still remembered that moment perfectly. And whenever he told the story to his grandchildren, he always ended it the same way. And that's how I learned that sometimes when we reach out to help someone, we discover we were the ones who needed help the most. Richard lived to 85, surrounded by the family he helped raise and who raised him in return. When he passed, he left behind not just a thriving company, but a legacy of love, generosity, and hope that would continue through generations. The scholarship program he created had already helped over 1,000 children pursue higher education. Many of them returned to help other families, creating a virtuous cycle of social change. Ethan took over as company president and expanded the social programs. Michael became the principal of a school in an underserved area, focusing on vulnerable children. Grace founded an NGO that helped single mothers find jobs and education. Each of them carried within them the lessons Richard had taught. That true wealth lies in the people we love, that every human being deserves a chance, and that small acts of kindness can change entire lives. At Richard's funeral, hundreds of people gathered, not just family and friends, but also the many families he had helped over the years. Children who were now successful adults, parents who never forgot his generosity, employees who had been treated like family. Amanda, now a 72-year-old woman, spoke about the husband she had lost. Richard always said he'd been very lucky in life, but I know the truth. He created his own luck through kindness, perseverance, and love. He turned his pain into purpose, his loneliness into family, his material wealth into human wealth. He taught me that it's never too late to start over, we're never too poor to dream, and we're never too alone to love. And most importantly, he taught me that family isn't just who you're born with, but who chooses to stay with you. Ethan stood up to speak about his adoptive father. My dad Richard taught me that being a man isn't about having a lot of money or power. It's about taking care of those who depend on you, reaching out to those in need, and turning your experiences into wisdom that can help others. When I was a child and hungry, he taught me that true hunger isn't just for food, it's for dignity, opportunity, and love, and he spent his whole life satisfying that hunger in hundreds of people. Michael, always more poetic, finished the tribute. Dad Richard took 2 lost children and showed us the way home. But home wasn't a place, it was his heart. He taught us that family is where there's unconditional love, room to grow, and someone who believes in you even when you don't believe in yourself. And now, even though he's no longer physically with us, we're still family. We still carry his love, his lessons, his kindness, and that's how he'll keep living in all of us. Grace was the last to speak. My dad always said life gave him a second chance to be a father when he adopted my brothers, but I think it was the boys who gave him a second chance to be happy. And when I was born, he gave me the chance to grow up in a family where love was more important than money, where dreams mattered more than fear. Dad, thank you for teaching us that the real legacy isn't material possessions but values, principles, and the ability to make a difference in others' lives. After the funeral, the family gathered at the mountain house where Richard and Amanda had spent so many happy weekends. It was there he had asked for his ashes to be scattered, in the garden where the children played, where the family grew, where so many memories were made. As they spread the ashes at sunset, a butterfly landed on one of the grandchildren's hands. The child looked at it in awe and asked, "Did Grandpa turn into a butterfly?" Amanda smiled through her tears. "In a way, yes. He became all the lives he touched, all the love he spread, all the hope he created. That night, as the family shared stories and memories, it became clear Richard had achieved what he wanted. Most, he'd built a legacy of love that would live on through generations. Because in the end, the true measure of a life isn't what we accumulate, but what we leave behind. And Richard left behind a united family, hundreds of changed lives, and proof that a generous heart can change the world, one person at a time. Years later, when Ethan told the story to his own grandchildren, he always ended it the same way his grandfather had. And that's how I learned that sometimes, when we reach out to help someone, we find out we were the ones who needed help the most. Grandpa Richard reached out to us when we were hungry children, but he discovered he was hungry too. Hungry for family, for love, for purpose. That's why we should always be ready to help, because we never know when a small gesture of ours might change an entire life, or when someone we help might end up changing ours. The story of the meeting in the parking lot became legendary in the Thompson family. Each generation passed it on to the next, always with the same message: that love is the only thing that grows when shared, that family is far more than blood, and that we all have the power to be the change someone needs. And so the simple words of a 5-year-old boy continued echoing through the decades. "Mister, take my brother with you. He's hungry." A phrase that had changed not just 2 lives, but hundreds, creating ripples of kindness that spread far beyond what Richard could have ever imagined. Because sometimes the biggest transformations begin with the smallest gestures, and sometimes saving someone is really about saving yourself too. End of story. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us so much as we're just starting out. Now tell us in the comments, do you believe Richard made the right choice by opening his heart to this family? Have you ever experienced or witnessed a situation where a small act completely changed lives? Share your story with us. We love reading your real-life experiences in the comments. Thank you for joining us, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories.